Hello, this lesson is about tides. So this is a picture of Formby Beach and on what we refer to as high tide. So the water's right in, you can't see any beach there at all. So before I get into it, I think it would be good to watch this video. I've linked this video, it's only a couple of minutes I think, and it explains it really clearly. And again, I'll do my best, but this YouTube video is pretty good. So this is another picture of Formby Beach when the tide is far out. So we know that the water comes in and then goes back out again. Some beaches, the water doesn't go as far. So other beaches it stays fairly close. And yeah, if you want to get to the water on Formby Beach when it's right out, it's a bit of a walk. So we need to understand why the tide seems to come in and out and what the relevance of that is to astronomy. And as you may know, it's to do with the moon, and as you may not have realised, it's also to do with the sun. So this simple diagram sums it up pretty well, I think. That the Earth rotates on its axis once every 24 hours. So high tide will occur when you're on a side which is close to the moon. Now think about this point here. If it takes 24 hours to get round, 6 hours later it'll rotate it to be round here, round the back. So that will not be close to the moon. So that would be low tide. Another 6 hours later it's round the left hand side here. Now, because of the way the moon makes the water bulge, that is another high tide. Another 6 hours later we're back to a low tide, and another 6 hours later we're back to a high tide. So, in a day, 2 high tides, 2 low tides. In between high tide and low tide, the water will go out, and in between low tide and high tide, the water will come in. Now you might think it would happen, therefore, the same time every day. It doesn't, it shifts slightly. I know if you go to a certain area, you can buy the tidal times for that area. Because of timings of the day and rotational periods and the movement of the moon as well, which we'll get into in other lessons. Okay, so that's a basic summary of what high tide is, low tide, and how it's caused by the moon. But I mentioned the sun, didn't I? So it complicates things ever so slightly. If I go on to the next slide. Here's, before I mention the sun, sorry, this is the difference between low tide and high tide. So that is something that we will refer to as tidal range. Nice simple diagram for you to draw there, and I would advise drawing the last diagram as well. So we get high tide, we get low tide. If it's a pretty steep incline here, then the water won't go horizontally as far. So Formby Beach is incredibly flat, so a slight raising of the level of the water will mean it travels a long distance horizontally. Okay, so here's where the sun comes in. You see, not every high tide is as high as every other high tide. You get really high tides, which you refer to as spring tide. Just think of the water springing up. And you also get high tides which are the opposite to that. The least high tides, which we refer to as neap tides. Okay, so why would that occur? Well, it's all to do with alignment of the sun and the moon. You see, the sun has an effect on the tides as well. So you can see here in this spring tide, the moon is on this side, but so's the sun. So the sun's pulling with the moon. So it increases the effect of the moon on the tide. So you get a much bigger tide than normal. Here though, in what we refer to as a neap tide, the moon's pulling the water up that way, but the sun is kind of working against it and pulling it the other way. So you don't get as dramatic effects. Okay, so you get the spring tide at the full moon, that's when you get a full moon, and at the new moon. You can work out it's a full moon or new moon, which is nice on this diagram. They've shown the side of the moon that's lit, so this is the light side. So that's a full moon there. You can see that as we look at it, this side's lit from the sun, and here's a new moon, so that would be dark in the sky. Okay, so I'd try and copy those diagrams, copy those notes, and then there's some questions for you to do attached on class charts. And that's it for tides. Thanks very much.